This is Channel 253. Beep, boop, boop, boop.
On this episode of the Grit and Grain Podcast.
And one of my favorite ones, better watch your ears on this one, Doug, is the ee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I have to ask now, like, where did that come from?
That was an IPA with like 4 different hops that started with the letter E.
And
Channel 253 is supported by Microsoft. Microsoft is committed to civic conversations like those on Channel 253 that inform and empower Washington communities. To learn more, visit aka.ms/Microsoft in Washington.
Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast, where we explore and celebrate the craft beer industry, community, and history in Tacoma, Washington, and surrounding Pacific Northwest areas. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit and Grain Podcast. Coming to you guys from the Parkway Tavern in Tacoma, Washington, talking about all of your favorite local craft beer nerdy shit. My name is Matt McLaren, and I'm here as always with our social media daddy, Ron Swarner.
What up, G?
Okay. And as always, Sean Jackson.
yeah, high beams rolling today.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And for a very specific reason, our guest today is somebody that we've all talked about having this conversation with for a long time, and somebody who's been enormously impactful in the beer world in the Northwest. Sean, who are we talking to today?
The one and only Steve Luke from Cloudburst.
Yay!
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming down, man. This is exciting. Like we gushed a lot about like the people that we really want to come and kind of get their stories on the record, and you were very high on the list, and so this is super fucking exciting.
I mean, it took Sean kind of like sneaking in the back of the brewery one day while I was amidst dry hopping an exploding tank.
Yeah.
to say, hey, do you want to come down? I was like, yes, yeah.
Hey, I know you're busy,
Like,
bud.
I did. It kind of walked in on a fuck up story.
Sick. Perfect. That means we'll get to it later.
Yeah.
We all probably have 30 things we want to ask you, but I know that we always try to start a little bit with kind of origin story stuff. So, do you want to take it at kind of the beginning of your beer journey, which started pretty young, as far as I understand?
Yes, yeah. Origin. My origin story started, I mean, professionally at 21. So when I could legally do the stuff. I took a summer job in Portland, Maine, between junior and senior years of college at Allagash Brewing, just to sweep floors, like make boxes, tape boxes, fold boxes, really just like all the stuff that no one wanted to do during like a summer rush. So spent a lot of time like in the bottle conditioning room. If I was so lucky to get on like the bottling line just to like offload bottles, that was like a really good day. So yeah, after 3 months there, finished up school, had such a great experience that I wanted to kind of stay involved in that industry. So moved back, into my parents' basement like we all do. Found a job at a newish brewery in New York State called Captain Lawrence Brewing, who's they're still in business today. But I was their employee number 2, just to wash kegs like twice a week and work in the tasting room once a week, taking the train in to commute. And that then parlayed into a job at Harpoon Brewing in Boston.
Oh, all right.
For like a year, and then back to Allagash. So they were my first and my 4th job. But this second time around, they taught me how to brew. So worked my way up from packaging into the cellar onto the brew deck. Then left Allagash for like a little head brewing position at a 7-barrel brew pub in Connecticut. Kind of had an ultimatum from my now wife to say stop moving farther away from me while she was in school in Connecticut. So there was not a lot of brewing jobs in Connecticut in like the early 2000s, mid 2000s. So happened to find a couple brewing jobs there. At one point, I was brewing on 3 different brew decks. At 2 different breweries, 2 pubs, 1 production facility. One was paying me cash under the table. One was one was going down for tax evasion. A different one.
Dang, dude.
And so shortly after that, I had applied to UC Davis Master Brewers Program. Got accepted there. Moved out to Davis while my wife finished up her school. She applied for residency programs all along the West Coast. She matched in Seattle. So we moved to Seattle, took a job with Rogue, running their Issaquah brew house.
Yeah,
for about a year.
So, real quick.
This is just like, I can just, like, this is such a long, boring, like,
This is not
Oh, we're gonna
boring at all.
stop
No. Arlen Harris, where did you come into play in Rogue Issaquah? Were you...
Arlen had been gone for a few years.
Okay.
The person that came before me was Hutch.
Oh, yeah.
And then Hutch came after me also. As those rogue hires like tend to do. It's like some of the ones orbit closer to the sun than others. And so I'd met Arlen like at a couple beer festivals, but at that point he was already like down in Olympia, like lobbying for things. I don't even know what the lotto maybe or something like. That's how bad. Yeah, that's how things turned for him, was just brewing to lobbyists. So I was there, and then I went from there to Elysian Brewing. Was at Elysian for 5 years before starting Cloudburst. So there's a few other breweries in the mix there that haven't been spoken of, but for the most part, those are the important ones.
That's a big resume.
Yeah.
So how many Allagash whites did you drink?
So many. And I still, like, every time I'm, like, where it's distributed, like, it's the first beer I drink. So a couple of weekends ago, we were in Asheville, North Carolina, and I knew Allagash White was there, and we had to find it. And then drink a lot of the local beer, too. But, like, if it's near, I can sniff it out,
When I was in D.C., it was freaking Allagash White and Yinglings on draft. I was
day,
like, I was
dude.
fucking happy.
Hell
Just keep
yeah.
rotating. I was like, this is
Totally.
the best day ever.
It's wild. I mean, like, people... I brewed that beer 9 days out of 10 in a row.
Yeah.
And I never got sick of it. And everyone, it's one of those things where people would say, you're going to get so sick of this beer, and you're going to sick of smelling the spices and, coming home with fresh stuff. And it's like, it's still, a top 3 favorite beer.
Yeah, dude.
Yep.
For anybody who's never had it, have you guys have had Allagash White? It's like, so it's a quintessential beer, but it's mostly available like on the East Coast and a few other places. It never really makes its way over here, but it's one of the most famous beers made in the country by a craft brewery, and kind of an unusual style, and even like an unusually complex version of that style. And it's still like, so it is like one of the most beloved beers, and it is perfect.
Is there anything close like it out here?
I mean, I haven't really tried anything close to it, and I've also never brewed one since I left, too.
I was going to ask you if you I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I know the recipe by heart. I mean, I'm sure it's changed since then, but it's just one of those things where you just don't touch it. It'll never be as good as that. So
you have not made a wit since you left Allagash?
No, we've made some the closest thing we made was like, I'd say like a strong wit base with a French Saison yeast strain. So not very close at all.
Sure.
Just close enough to kind of pay homage to it, but not really touch it.
Nice.
And yeah, I mean, that's just that beer. I mean, it really spans people that have had it. Like you can give that beer to someone that doesn't even like craft beer, and they're going to enjoy it. Kind of like on the coattails of a Blue Moon. But then it's still winning over this course of like 20 plus years, World Beer Cup medals, GABF medals, something to kind of still win like those awards by style in the 90s, in the aughts, in the 10s, and in the 20s. Like, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
Most things evolve kind of out of that style. But
So when you were at Harpoon, were you in the marketing department?
I was in the marketing.
Is that
department,
how come your social media rocks?
I was like, the marketing department there started with just managing their tasting room and giving tours. And yeah, it's that Harpoon is the second like most corporate brewery I worked for. It's run by some Harvard MBAers. So it's like, it's like really, really closely, it just didn't really like pull on my heartstrings there.
It's an airport brewery.
It's an
airport brewery.
It made me realize I really liked being in the back of the space, the production space, instead of being in the front. And now, marketing. I mean, like our marketing might be, to some it's great and to some it's horrible. So it's just so
It's so funny.
Scrappy, and our photoshopping is like a 99-cent app on our iPhone and things like that.
That's awesome.
Well, one of my favorite things is the name game, right? Some of my favorite beer names have come out of Cloudburst. And when we did Hoppywood Squares this year, that was actually a frequent question was, which of these is not a Cloudburst beer name? And
It came
my
up
favorite
6 times.
Yeah, it was such an easy game. Like, was it Swedish prison orgy?
Yeah.
I got someone on that one. They're like, there's no way.
Someone's like, there's no
way
way.
that's a beer name. Like, yes, it is. Fuck yeah.
Do you ever get any cease and desist with the photoshopping?
No, never. Like we keep like thinking someone's going to be upset about it. I mean, no cease and desists from between like just using famous people to, poking the bear repeatedly. Like nothing. I think on the other side of that cease and desist, the bear that we're poking, if they ever send us one, it's gonna blow. It's it's all for us.
Totally.
There's nothing good that will come of it from them, and so it's kind of just we.
One of my favorite ones is when you had the 20 people lined up in front of the side glass taking photos.
Oh
I
yes,
still laugh at that one.
Yeah. I mean, like that's it's so it kind of everything really falls into place pretty organically. Like there's a lot of things aren't planned beforehand. I mean, even some of these names are, the beer is named like the Sunday before it's on the sales sheet on Monday, and it's Noah saying, well, we need a name for this and a description. And it's like, okay, well, let's see what we can pull out of either our mythical whiteboard of names or just something that is
Our
present.
mythical whiteboard of
I love the
wanna see that.
whiteboard. It's fucking fantastic. It's just little phrases, and it's a lot of them. And I've got a couple peeks at it, and I can spend a lot of time sitting there looking at the whiteboard.
You should add some stuff to the whiteboard.
I've been tempted before, but I was. You can't name every beer penis vagina. It's just like volume 2. Like, oh no, that's not how it works.
If you say each one of them enough, you could probably get it.
Right.
You guys ever seen that episode of South Park where they make fun of Family Guy with the manatees bringing the balls with the words on it over to the tank, and that's how they make up a Family Guy joke? That's kind of what I picture goes on when you guys are naming beers every time, especially when we were doing the Hoppywood Squares, and Sean was like listing off these names. I was like, where are these coming from? And what kind of beer is this? Like, I've had plenty of them, but like, I've never had Swedish Prison Orgy. What beer was that, by the way?
Yeah, it was a triple IPA. I mean, it had to be like, a ridiculous name that has to kind of like match like a ridiculous
a ridiculous style.
And one of my favorite ones, better watch your ears on this one, Doug, is the E.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I have to ask now, like, where did that come from?
That was an IPA with like 4 different hops that started with the letter E.
And
That was one of those. That was like, we need a name, and we need a name now.
yeah, Nick and I had a lot of fun selling that one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, A lot of customers did not have a lot of fun ordering it.
I mean, in some of those names, like our staff just rolls their eyes at us, but it's just like, having fun ordering, like even with the Vienna, side of toast, it's just like, it's an upsell. It's like, and do you want a side of toast with that? and playing off, it's like, how can we sell more 4-packs? Just like tack them on, But yeah, the E, like making people say certain things, for that like interaction between the person serving your beer and the person ordering your beer, like that's where some fun can lie.
I love that actually, because it's like the ethos of like not taking yourself super seriously in an industry where people certainly do, and I don't know, breaking the ice and making it more fun and kind of accessible in a way it's awesome.
The breakup series, that was beautiful.
Series.
There was some winners in there. Was it like, it's not you, it's me?
What? Oh, I don't even. Yeah, the God, I have to like rack my brain for the breakup series. Like,
It was a few of them.
I don't even know if cognitively I was like thinking, like, what? It's a series of beers we did of like breaking up with people. Huh.
And I'm not going to
Just came
say
naturally.
I believe you.
I
Mike.
thought it
About
came
the
around
ultimatum,
a
right?
release of a Taylor Swift album.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I felt like this was kind of a. Let's not rack anybody's brains.
No, but
Let's
yes,
keep it.
we did that. We did that.
Someone's going to remember and send it to us.
Yeah.
When you opened Cloudburst, you were doing the Market Saison series. Did COVID kill it? Was that
No,
the thing?
that kind of died off in like 2018 or so, mostly just from like keeping that yeast alive and like the focus. I mean, Saison strains are so finicky, and while at some point, like at any time something feels forced, we kind of like sit down and say, are we like, is this something that we should continue to pursue? And we'd kind of gone through a whole bunch of different fruit and spice combos. Combined with just like me not feeling 100% confident that I'm making these beers as the best that I can. With that, I don't know that was a BSI's French Saison yeast strain, which is one of those yeast strains that some breweries build their entire beer and ethos around. And just for me to only have to use it like once every 3 weeks, like wasn't enough for me to really like figure it out to the way that I wanted to. And we have so many other friends that are making fantastic Saisons, and like they're a focus, on that Saison. So it was kind of an easier thing to like let go and like, that's kind of the same way. Like we've never brewed a sour beer as well. And that's also because like there's some fantastic sour beers, coming out of Seattle, coming out of Tacoma, coming out of Washington and Oregon, and that, it's kind of more like let those people do their thing really well versus us kind of dabbling with it and then not, having it not really come out as good as I would want it to be.
Yeah. Speaking of good, your hazy IPAs, they're so dialed in. Is it because you were from the East Coast?
I mean, like hazy IPAs weren't a thing when I was brewing on the East Coast. Okay. Like, to me, a New England style IPA is like crystal malt and diacetyl with Cascade and Fuggles.
So mean.
It's like that's like Dogfish Head, like Shipyard, Harpoon IPA, like that was like the New England IPA when I was there.
Good point.
Yeah. It wasn't until like 2010, 2011 that people really started to like push it the other way, and Stoneface and Alchemist and those guys kind of started pushing that.
Totally. Like Alchemist existed when I was out there, but they were a little pub. And I don't even know, I don't know like when like, Heady Topper was a beer. I want to say it wasn't really being produced when I was out there. And even still like out there, like the whole like line culture and like barrel aged like beers, like that was just starting too with Portsmouth Brewing, this like little pub in New Hampshire, did a beer called Kate the Great, which was like the first time I'd ever seen people like line up for a beer. And that brewer he's got his own like little family brewery in Southern Maine now, Todd Mott, but like that's one of those like New England brewing legends that really like left a formative opinion like on me, where It's kind of funny. It's so regional. Like there's so many brewers that have been brewing for like 20, 25, 30 years that like, you move one state over and people are like, who are you talking about? And
Yeah.
you're like, it's like, but for New England, there's a handful of guys that are still doing it. And it's just like, it's unreal that like,
So you had mentioned before that Alan Pugsley's kind of influence around like the New England area, especially with like ringwood yeast.
Yeah.
Like it influenced basically the entire industry in that area to kind of just use one yeast and kind of stick to his game plan that he was like developing. And then you had mentioned that there was like a few places kind of straying from that, and that's that was like exciting to you, is that these people were kind of pushing the envelope. Is it like that kind of early thing where you were like, oh, these guys are doing something different, like I want to also do that in a really dynamic beer world? Was it kind of that early influence, or did that come later?
It was kind of like it was more of a specific like example of when I was taking over this pub in Connecticut, my first head brewing job, coming from being just a shift brewer to running that pub. The person that had set up that brewery was a well-known like New England brewer. And it was like the classic brew pub model of like, here are like 5 core beers, and then I was allowed to like have my 6th tank be like whatever I wanted. Mm-hmm. But really kind of like at first getting the core beers, this IPA, it was an IPA, there was a Kolsch, there was a stout, and there was an ESB. And so the IPA, I'd follow, the person's recipe. I'd put it on tap. The regulars would be like, this is different. This doesn't taste like the other guy's name was Steve too. He's like, doesn't taste like what Steve did. And I was like, what? I was like, yeah. Well, I don't know. I followed everything to the, I followed everything. So like, I do it again. A month later, they'd be like, nah, this one tastes different too, and things like that. So that it started to kind of wear on me, being like, here you have this IPA. It's got the same name. I'm using the same raw materials. But hop lots change, harvests change.
Right.
There are lots of things that brewers kind of do that's unspoken that I don't even know what I'm doing sometimes. Like I couldn't fully like 100% verbalize like every single little thing I'm doing during the brewing process throughout the entire day, so that someone could come in and just make exactly the beer the way that I do.
Right.
And this person wasn't even involved anymore, so I was kind of just like picking up the pieces and trying to like recreate this IPA, this house IPA that people just drink every week, week in and week out. Mm-hmm. And it became so frustrating to me that it was never going to be however this other person made it. And that's kind of where like the rotating IPA thing came into play, as kind of more of a why does it have to kind of always be the same? And if people are going to perceive these differences, whether they think they are perceiving it or not, which as you kind of grow old, you realize and you kind of taste your friends' beers, and it's like Lucille can change their entire hop bill and grain bill like 3 years ago, and like nobody makes a peep, and you're drinking it, and you're like texting, Matt Edwards being like, what hops did you change in Lucille? He's like, all of them. And it's like, has the hundreds of thousands of people that drink this beer said anything? He's like, no. It's like,
not one.
Yeah. But like that was like early on. That's kind of what led me to like. There's I came from a brewery where I was brewing the exact same beer,
right?
And hitting all the specs we had. There was a lab. There was so many more SOPs in place at Allagash than at a pub, and that's kind of by design. Coming into another place, so then with no SOPs, but then trying to flavor match to the 12 people sitting at the bar,
right?
And that got under my skin pretty quick. So. And what I also learned was like I took that beer away for a few months and then brewed it again, and it's like it's like if they're not
nailed it this time,
if they're not able
this
to
is
try
why
it,
beer is art.
I always wonder, like, I have a lot of love and affection for so many beers over the years, I do wonder, like, my modern palate, like, how would I think of this at this point? This thing I haven't had in 7-8 years. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at even recipes that, early Cloudburst recipes to now, and while there's lots of like similar themes, if we were to rebrew, a beer we brewed in our first year next week, I think you'd be like, I don't know, it's little like it's not as it hasn't. It's like we are slowly like always kind of evolving into like keeping beers relevant and like trying to stay true to our palates and stay true to the people that buy our beers palates too, so that it probably wasn't as good 5 years ago as it is right now. At least that's the way that I see it. But memory is one of those things that is just, there's so much emotion in memory, especially like
smelling something,
feeling like there's like emotions of like remembering when you had this one beer and it was a fantastic day and you were on this epic hike and you just got to like the top of it and saw this view and you cracked the can and you're like, this is the best beer you guys have ever made. You're like, oh, what? I don't know if I don't think it was the best beer. But like, what else did you must have had an awesome day, and that kind of capped it off on that. So
yeah, I remember going to Oceanside from Arizona and drinking stone beers on the beach. And then, bringing some back home to Arizona and drinking them is like, they are not as fucking delicious. it's just not. It's like, I was like, sitting on the beach is like, this is the best goddamn thing I've ever had in my life. A little green flash when you're watching the sunset.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
It's not as good in Arizona.
It's about the whole experience. It's contextualizing what you're drinking.
It's emotional.
I was curious, actually. So, like, going back to the Alan Pugsley thing, do you think that like the beer world today has room for like one person like that to be that influential to a region, or do you think everything is more consumer driven, especially with things like Untapped and social media and stuff?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that there's always some people that have more influence than others. I don't know if anything like, I mean, to be honest, I think Pugsley kind of probably set the New England region back from like the modernization of craft beer by at least a decade.
For a fair argument for that?
When everyone kind of latches on to this yeast that is difficult and frequently puts out an off flavor. And he also had some brewing schools in New England too that taught some not great habits. That you'd go into breweries and you'd be like, why are you? Well, we want this blonde ale to finish at 3 Plato. It's at 4 Plato right now, so you crash it. And you're like, oh, you don't want to set your beer up to just finish at 3 Plato. You just want to, and there's a brewery in the Northwest that also does stuff like that.
Sure.
We've all probably had, and they're barely just decreasing, every year for the last 5 years or so until they try to figure that out. But I don't know. Back on that question, I mean, like I think it's easy to look at California, between the Stone and Firestone and Russian River and, kind of like Pizza Port and like that West Coast IPA certainly kind of all came out of these breweries. And there's a handful of people that really kind of like push those boundaries early on and let kind of everyone catch up and learned from.
Right.
So I don't know, like if like in modern day, I think that there are still people that are super well respected for certain styles that a lot of brewers, do want to listen to a podcast or read an interview and kind of like figure out what they're doing, whether it's like how they're doing barrel-aged stouts or how they're designing, modern IPAs. And so I don't know, it's harder to influence this, and the Untapped thing and like the consumerism thing. It's important, but it's you can't let it be too important, as a brewer or as a business owner too.
Sure.
It's certainly one of those. It's such a weird place to be on the receiving end of just like people with imperfect information and a whole wider range of tastes and experiences and knowledge that then just can like bestow an approval rating like on you, whether it's here with Yelp or Google, and now we have Untapped on top of that. And I think it's difficult for anyone. I think all of our friends that are small owners of businesses or owners of small business and brewers, like you really have to be make a concerted effort to like distance yourself from other people's opinions. And I think that's also harder, you know, in the last decade to do with opinions about pretty much everything in the world. So
I'll be crashing into your face constantly.
yeah, it's crazy. So I don't know, like at the end of the day, you got to be making beers that you are proud of, and you really should be focused on like making a quality product too. And at least things like having a QA/QC program or being confident with your cleaning and sanitation. And you know, part of the reason for entering a competition like the Washington Beer Awards or GABF or World Beer Cup is kind of a little bit of like that confirmation that like even if someone really didn't like this beer and I had 2.5 caps on Untapped, but it won a medal, or at least it got some nice notes back, it's like, okay, like I am making what I think I'm making, and my head, you know, isn't in the sand about things like that.
Totally.
Which is kind of just another like plug for like little competitions like that. Mark and Peter, have they been on the podcast yet? Do you know those guys at all?
Yeah.
But like, you know, the behind the scenes of something like that is like, it's super cool. And like the amount of like energy and time they put into a competition like that for like no money at all, just the goodness of their hearts is like, it's pretty impressive. So
And that rating thing too, like always like the beer trading.
Yeah.
When your beer ends up in across the sea getting rated, you know, that's always got to be fun.
Totally. I
gotta love that.
I'm really thankful. It's like I've never been in the trading world. I don't pay attention to any of that. I've never like been on Reddit, and I think it's intentional too. It's like I can only like handle like so many.
Also
inputs.
a virgin.
Yeah.
Bless
so like
you.
I just like sometimes just kind of like let things like exist out there, and like you don't have to be aware of all of it because you'll go crazy. thinking about it.
Good
So-
fucking call.
That's one of the reasons I'm so goddamn happy. All the shots to the dome.
Yeah.
That's a factor.
All the brain damage.
And just the lack of paying attention to fucking anything. That's good. Seriously.
They tie in so well.
What a great life I live.
We're going to take a super quick break, but we'll be back in just a minute with Steve, and we might squeeze a fuck up story in here on this first half, I think. But yeah, stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. To people just joining us. If you zoned out for that first half, we're hanging out with Steve Luke from Cloudburst. But before we get back to it, I do want to give a quick shout out to Channel 253. Doug Mackey, our wonderful producer, is from Channel 253 and makes us sound extra professional every week. But
Cheers,
Channel
Doug.
253, yeah, cheers, Doug. Woo. Channel 253 is great. It's a wonderful network of podcasts hosted by community members and community leaders, and they have topics ranging from all sorts of things: education, local politics, and community service, and beer.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you guys want to check it out, stay connected to your community, this network of podcasts is a great way to do it. You can check them out and support them by going to channel253.com/membership. Alrighty, so I skipped it actually when we first started because I was just so excited to talk to Steve. But I didn't ask anybody what they were drinking, so I'm going to ask now. Steve, do you know what you're drinking?
I have so many things in front of me right now.
I know. Does Sean know what you're drinking?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody's New Zealand Pilsner,
Nice.
or a Pilsner with New Zealand hops.
Yeah.
And
New nomenclature.
Yeah. And yeah, it's great. It's got some Nelson Sauvin in there, but it's still subtle enough that it's balanced, which, I mean, New Zealand hops in a Pilsner can certainly go out of balance real quick.
Sure.
And then Sean just poured me a nitro pour of Double Mountain's Dry Irish Stout.
Yeah.
Because I miss nitro beer. I don't see nitro beer around
Fucking A.
anywhere. And it's such a pain in the butt to make, too. So good on Double Mountain for still doing it.
Amen.
When somebody heard that you were coming, they did request that you make your oyster stout again.
Oh,
and that on nitro would be pretty fucking money.
We will do that again at some point.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like
The
that
first
one,
thing
too.
somebody said when I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, Steve Luke's coming down." They're like, "Dude, did you ever try his oyster stout?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah.
A super boner beer.
Hell yeah,
Yep.
and not just because of the oysters.
Yeah. I just
Nice job, buddy.
I'm out of here.
Set it up.
I'm out of here.
Spike. Bumps that spike.
Sean, what are you drinking? You guys are horrible
I ate my
influences.
side of toast first.
Nice. Likewise.
Yeah. And so I've got the Cloudburst scene change. And I think we all have
We do.
had some 7C's 2011 wheelchair barley wine.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Ron and I are also drinking Scene Change.
We are.
And it's lovely.
It is.
Doug is too.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, Doug is too.
Yeah.
Doug is lovely and also drinking that beer.
It's bitter and dry and a little acidity. Are you a foodie?
I love food. Yes. Yeah.
Because your hazies work well with food. It cuts the food.
Yes. Thank you for noticing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because everything is pretty dry.
Kiss ass.
And we add, hops to the kettle, so there's going to be bitterness kind of throughout. And yeah, our house yeast is typically is quite dry, and this beer we actually did not use our house yeast on it because we've had like a 3-week gap. We're not telling anybody this, so they're gonna have to listen to the podcast to see. But we use a house ale yeast in all of our ales. But between hop harvest, chaos, and having a fresh batch of our lager strain going, we had a gap that we needed to fill with some ale yeast before our fresh crop of house yeast came back in. And just on a flyer, our friends that brew down in San Francisco use this as their house yeast. Cellar Maker Brewing uses this yeast, which is from Berkeley Labs, and it is their diacetyl-free hazy Chico strain. So
I keep hearing about this.
it's a genetically modified yeast strain to not produce diacetyl.
So is it that there's no...
Jesus.
I know. I've been trying to wrap my brain around it. I've read a bit about it, and is the mechanism that it just doesn't precursors don't transform? Is that the idea?
Correct. Yeah. So it's basically, I believe it's spliced with essentially ALDC.
Yep.
So that it's never produced. However, the fun twist with this is that when we were done with our 3 turns, I gave it to Georgetown Brewing for their 15-barrel system, and they have a great lab. So they then ran this yeast side by side, their house yeast, and now it's like, well, will you do our yeast too? But every day they took their GC to the wort, and while it doesn't produce diacetyl, it does produce a different VDK, pentane dione, which at some point kind of mimics flavors of diacetyl, but then it kind of goes more like creamy, like vanilla.
It's mild and has kind of honey
it's
thing
mild,
too sometimes. Yeah.
And so it's really less offensive than diacetyl, basically.
Yep.
So it's not just it's not 100% VDK free, and we still gave this 3.5 weeks in the tank, so everything was cleaned up, and we were doing our own sensory VDKs on it too. And when I was doing it the first time, I was like, I don't know, it's kind of smells positive to me, but I don't. My nose isn't calibrated to tell you whether it's butane dione or pentane dione or anything like that. So.
So I know we're throwing out a bunch of nerd words.
Sorry, this is getting very technically
just so everybody knows. If you're
nerdy.
if you don't dig into brewing super hard, VDKs are they're vicinal diketones, or however you want to pronounce it, but they're precursors to diacetyl. So when a beer's fermenting, those can turn into diacetyl, which if you've ever had a beer that has the buttery, popcorny kind of flavor, it's a beer that hasn't quite cleaned up all the way in the fermenter. So you need to leave it in, and the yeast will kind of read all of that, and then you won't have those in your final beer. A lot of breweries, especially when they're trying to put out really fresh, green, super strong, hoppy beer, will package their stuff a little early, and then VDKs can eventually turn into diacetyl sometimes after packaging, and then you get these kind of unpleasant off flavors. So what this yeast does is kind of prevents all of that. So you can put the freshest beer possible into a package without having to worry about some of the off flavors that come from packaging your beer too early. Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, it was kind of we rarely experiment, and I think most brewers, particularly myself, we're creatures of habit, and I want to use, our house yeast I've been using now for
12 plus years because it was also Elysian's house yeast. So it's something that I know in and out, what it's going to do, where it's going to be at throughout fermentation. And so we really kind of play around with different yeast strains. But this time around, we gave it a shot. And, we've got 3 IPAs basically coming out with this yeast strain, and then we're back onto our regular house strain. And the experiment is that, again, I don't think anyone's going to know that we used a different yeast, but it doesn't particularly taste like a token Cloudburst IPA to me because of that, but I'm also fully biased and, I'm drinking our IPA every week. So, I'm curious to kind of see. So we ran 3 different recipes. So this is kind of more of let's add some adjuncts to this. So there's some oats, some spelt, some wheat, and kind of use a different hopping regimen to see how that tastes with this yeast. This was Gen 0. The next one is a token Cloudburst IPA with a grist of 2-row and Pils malt, hopped with our 4 most popular hops, which is Chinook, Strata, Citra, Mosaic. Will that taste like a Cloudburst IPA or not? And then we've got another more tropical IPA coming out before we get back on our corporate ale yeast. So, anyways, if I didn't tell you that, I still think with our grist, our water, our salts, our hop additions and ratios, it's a Cloudburst IPA, but blindly, I feel like some people might say, I don't know, it doesn't taste as much but I feel like at this point, people blindly can just know what our IPA tastes like, regardless of what hops are in it. If we tweak the malt bill and whatnot.
So I'll keep a tally. I'll send you all the data. Jerry said.
What are your thoughts on new genetically modified ingredients? And do you feel what you're describing to me now is almost like an undermining of your expression as a brewer, right? This new thing comes out, and I'm putting it out and I'm doing my best work, but I still don't feel like it's totally mine. Do you feel like a lot of thiolized yeast strains or things like GM yeast strains that don't produce diacetyl are kind of undermining some of the expressive work that goes into making beer? Or do you or is it just exciting to have cool new things to play with?
No, I mean, I think that there's always going to be. I think that I like that those things continue to evolve and are out there and people use them, and it keeps people creative and otherwise you could become stagnant. And so some people kind of want to always keep moving and using new things and progressing, and that's fun. I think that. I don't know, are they kind of cheat codes? Yes. I think that you, at a certain point, you're removing some, and some learned skill, some, learned palate.
Shortening the skill barrier a little bit.
And, I mean, there's also, sub-perceptible things that come along, especially with, diacetyl and VDKs, where talking to, a brewer Ben Edmonds at Breakside Brewing out of Portland, their blind sensory panels, their beer is always rated higher when there's a VDK reading of 10 ppb below thresholds versus none at all. And it's you can't ever, people are I don't know why, I just like this one better. And it's and at this point it's become a significant difference of
dang.
Weird why we're just talking about why we like something better when these levels of these dials and things that we're tweaking are all technically sub-perceptible, but why is it reliably this one is preferred?
Just a little extra body. Just a little extra body.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That is crazy. I've never heard that.
Also, cheat codes goes on the whiteboard, right?
That's got to be taken.
For the next one, dude.
Yeah. But the cheat codes, the thiolized thing is really cool. I think that that they're pushing a new frontier. But I do think that I think that it's kind of a bells and whistles. There's lots of shiny new objects always to kind of be seen, and then at what point do people continue to perfect using those yeast strains, or does it become something the enzyme that people were making brewed IPAs with for 18 months, and now it's what happened to that? That was a cool project too. But then if you get back, if you want to kind of dig deeper into I think working with anything that's GMO, I think that there are pros and cons to it. and I mean, like, you know, they're like anything where good can come from, evil can equally like use that and also kind of like blow it out of proportion too.
Sure.
So I know like the GMO food debate is a big thing, and like typically like that's going to be taken advantage of by like larger like ag more than anything.
Yeah.
That could then really affect a whole lot of other environmental factors. But at the same time, you know, talking to some scientists that are genetically modifying tomatoes to like be super high in like the anti-cancer agent, was it like lycopene or,
Yep.
you know, like there's an article in the New York Times where they're interviewing this food scientist who has these like beautiful like purple like Cherokee like tomatoes, and she's like, well, you know, sure, someone could take advantage of this, but like I just made like the highest, you know, percentage tomato that tastes good that like has like this
Nutrients and
anti-cancer
stuff,
agent in
yeah.
it too. So like it's very complicated, but when it comes down to beer, I think it's a little bit like less complicated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hard to know how like AB
yeah.
would use phantasm against all of us, but you never know.
They will.
You never fucking know.
I mean, really, yeah, it's the hop growers that would be concerned about that. They're like, wait a
Right.
second. So instead of dry hopping something 4 pounds per barrel, you're only going to dry hop it 1 pound per barrel and then use the stylized yeast. And now all of a sudden, like, what happens to all these acres that, you know, and contracts that you signed
Yeah.
up?
Everyone
Yes,
was
it's
begging for, screaming, kicking.
yeah. So it's a slippery slope.
Yeah,
for sure.
fuck yeah.
I do. I know I've been talking a bunch. I'm sorry. Ron did ask a question that I wanted to touch on because he brought up the foodie thing. You guys are recipients of an accolade that not a lot of breweries get. You were nominated for a James Beard Award, were you not?
Yes.
That's
yeah,
fucking
yeah.
rad.
That's rad.
And I don't know
That's
if anybody like knew that, but like very, very few beer producers in the country actually get this. It mostly goes to wine and distilleries, but Cloudburst and Luke was nominated for a James Beard Award.
Yeah, that's like a lifetime achievement award.
That's dude.
was mind blowing.
Yeah.
So
alongside like Hogstone and Canless and like all of the major big foodie restaurants in Seattle on that list as well was Steve, and that's like, yeah, it was super cool to read that. And like, how do you think? Do you think that acknowledgments like that are non-beer world focused benefit the beer world?
I think to a certain extent, I mean, it gives us a seat at the table, you know,
Right.
as far as mostly just that they are paying attention to some like little like craft beer worlds. And I think, especially like with that organization, and they've since removed that category. So like we were nominated like the
So
last
whack.
year,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh no, it's gone. So
You blew
but-
it, Steve.
Yes. Yeah. Then they paused everything, and you know. But I mean, the one that I did, and that organization kind of had at least like a 2-year period of like reassessing, you know, their metrics and like prioritizing, you know, different kind of like their whole system of how of who's getting the recognition and why, which was awesome. But they've always like at least kind of started to put attention on really small like neighborhood centric spots. I mean, you look at those lists of just like the regional like, you know, chef awards or baking awards and things, and it's like, you know, there was a bakery on the peninsula that had a nomination a few years back. You know, there's a little donut shop in Hillman City right by Slow Boat Tavern that like, you know, had a nom, and it's like you see that those businesses they're so stoked. They're like, oh my God, someone nationally is like paying attention to me, when it's like I'm having a hard enough time just getting people in my neighborhood to come down here and buy a fucking croissant.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, how to, it's huge. But from the beer side of things, I mean, I think just having like beer be on the same level as wine producers and distillers, which, you know, there's a lot more money in distilling and wine, and there always has been. And I think that money has always kind of like given them the foot in the door for one, to kind of pursue whatever projects they want to, but also like to have a budget to kind of like push for some like recognition and marketing and campaigns and things like that.
Right.
And beer has kind of always been like the, you know, the I don't know, the little child that like hasn't really ever been like taken as seriously when.
Yeah. It's been at the kids' table for 100 years.
Well, to expand on that idea, did Happy Little Clouds give you recognition in the art world?
God, I hope not, because there's our first cease and desist right there. Right? Have you seen that Netflix documentary about like his estate and how like messy and it's gotten? But we at this point we hope that that's an original image that an illustrator friend in the Bay Area like made for us. So like we have like that going for us. And Happy Little Clouds is the only beer name we've ever trademarked other than like Cloudburst Brewing. So we have the federal trademark like for that name. And so at least at some point someone might say, you can't really have this person's likeness on this can, and we'll happily change it at this point. It's had a good run, but we'll let it ride until it does. I don't think we'll have to change the name, but we might have to change like the image. I mean, if we had like Michael Jordan on our can, like slam dumping a hop, like at some point someone's gonna say, "Hey, that's Michael Jordan on your can. That's not okay."
Were you a fan of the show?
I don't even see it.
Yes. So that beer, the name and the show, a lot of our, for every silly name that we, for every Swedish prison orgy, there are names that have multiple layers of meanings. And Happy Little Clouds, I grew up watching the show. And it was always an incredibly frustrating, to tears experience where this guy is just making things look so effortless, painting these beautiful scenes, and it's like magic, and then you try to do it yourself and it just looks like a fucking 7-year-old made a lake in a tree and things like that, and you're like, how is he doing it? It's so frustrating that that kind of parlayed over into all right, this is going to be our Pilsner. It's going to be the only beer that we continuously make, and it's hard and frustrating, and it takes lots of experience to make such a simple seeming beer. And that was kind of the link between Bob and the Pilsner.
Beautiful.
It's actually a great story. I love that.
Yeah.
Doug says we only have a few minutes left. Do we want to squeeze in a fuck up story before part 2? Just so people know, this is a 2-parter, and we have more time with Steve, but it's up to you, Sean.
I mean, you go, I go?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, what's your fuck up story first?
I mean, it's not industry related, but it was a recent event.
We ran out of those?
Kind of goes to the head trauma, and they've heard it.
Took 16
we
episodes.
just started as a family playing the scare the shit out of each other game, and this is what ended it. In the upstairs of my house, it's a very narrow hallway, and the steps go down to the master bedroom, and they're very steep. So there's 3 steps, and you drop about 4 feet. And so my oldest and my lady were in the bedroom, and I was like, I'm going to run down the hallway, and I'm going to leap through the fucking door, and just everyone's going to piss themselves. It's going to be fucking awesome. So I big steps, all ninja-like, and then I leap, and I crack the center of my forehead on my beautiful old hardwood crown molding. Feet continue to go up almost horizontal, and then my head bounces down the fucking stairs. So it kind of worked. They screamed. Scared the shit out of them. And then, so I'm lying on the ground, trying to be tough as hell. Don't cry, don't make sounds, just lay there and wait it out.
Die in peace.
And my daughter says, didn't you learn your lesson from when you did that before? And I travel back X amount of years. I was like, fucking A, this isn't the first time I've done this. Yep.
And she remembered it.
Yeah, she's good about it. Low head trauma on that one.
She didn't hit her heads.
Oh, loved it.
Steve, do you have any head trauma
Oh my God,
injuries by chance?
I can't follow that.
Yes, you can.
None of
Yes,
ours
you
are
can.
ever as good as Sean's.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It's a gift.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk like brewery head trauma and drama, both.
Yeah.
Elysian Fields, like, you know, the walk-in cooler and all the Grundy tanks are in the basement, and that building is like 100+ years old, and the ceiling is probably like 6'2", because like if I wear a beanie, I touch it, but the redwood beams going underneath, you know, you kind of have to like dip down. And so when you're transferring beer there, it's like a 200-foot run. And like, you know, at the time we had open fermenters, like I can't, like the things that you look back on, you're like, wow, like those beers had so much oxygen, like contact as we're transferring. Luckily, like, you know, they would blow through those beers really fast, but you're constantly scrambling. Like, all right, once the transfer is done, I have to run 200 feet, you know, upstairs and like shut the valve, you know, up top once I shut it at the bottom. And occasionally you kind of put your head up before the beam and like it'll wipe you on your ass. And maybe you wake up like, I don't know, 20 minutes later.
I'm sure there's brewery concussion protocol, right?
Oh, totally. Yes. Yeah.
Of course.
And the beer was done transferring. For sure.
Nice.
When those 20 minutes are up.
Oh, yeah. God. It's making my head hurt thinking about that.
All right, Grit and Grainers. Email us at cheers@gritandgrainpodcast.com with your comments, opinions, and our recipe for our octuple IPA that smashed over actual lava sourced from Dante's Peak while loudspeakers crank out Dio's Holy Diver on a loop inside the Satsup's abandoned underground nuclear plant. We read and drink everything we receive, and we try to respond as quickly as we can, if not online, then on air. You can subscribe to Grit and Grain at Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher, and please leave us a review. Also, check us out on Channel 253 and gritandgrainpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for episode notes, beer news, and where to score those tiny little books by Emily Dickinson or E.E. Cummings or whomever, and take it home and sip some Happy Little Clouds Pilsner and maybe get naked and just start reading aloud, because the world could really use some more poetry in the minds of the people to make us all more grittier and grainier and cloudburstier. That's all I'm saying. If this podcast is not what you expected, please alter your expectations. You cannot skitter and hide like a petrified mouse from the giant vacuum cleaner of raging karma. There's no such thing as a bad time to visit Tacoma. There's no such thing as too much barley wine. Woo! Tune in next Friday for more sweet chatter with the one and only Steve Luke. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us at Grit and Grain Podcast wherever you get your social media and catch new episodes every Friday. Cheers.
This is Channel 253.